Welcome to She Been Ready, the podcast. She Been Ready is a conversation, a declaration, and a clarification that Black women have always led. On this podcast, I, Dr. Wendi Williams, educator, psychologist, leader, and auntie, will be joined by Black women who lead and those who have been led well by them. So, you don't have to get ready when you stay ready. And you can trust in the leadership of a Black woman because she been ready. All right, y'all. So welcome back to She Been Ready, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Wendi Williams. I am super duper excited to bring on our next guest today. Shri Deihl is a wonderful, wonderful human, a dear, dear friend, and my teacher. So I began yoga classes with Shri in Brooklyn in 2014, 15-ish. We became good friends over time. And as I have been learning from her ever since, I can tell you that, you are just in for such an amazing and delicious treat. So Shri was a cooperative owner of Third Root Wellness Center, which was this amazing place. It was like apothecary in some ways, roots, herbal lessons and teachings, body work, massage, Reiki, and then yoga, meditation practice. And, it really meant to be a community wellness space, and it really was. For me, Third Root was literally the third leg of community engagement and connection that I needed to cultivate my yoga practice, but really my spiritual practice needed a grounding space. You can do so much. I've read so many books. I can meditate on my own a lot and do a lot of things, but you also need to do this work in community. And that's one of the main lessons and teachings that I gathered from my experiences in relationship with Shri, but also in being in community with folks at Third Root. So each Saturday, Shri would offer the 10 in the morning yoga class. It was amazing. And through my experiences with her, I started to learn more about her work and her initiatives at Third Root. So one of those, and what I'll say about both of these pieces is that they were so about expanding the definition and access of folks who are typically not, who we are thinking about when we are in yogic or mindfulness spaces. Talking about folks of color, we're talking about folks who, have bodies that are round and voluptuous and beautiful and full, and also who aren't on the cover of some of those yoga and wellness magazines. So Shri's work is really about, or at least in that space that I experienced, is really about opening up that space for folks with melanated bodies, folks with abundant bodies. I asked Shri to the podcast because I wanted her to share a bit about her leadership philosophy, her practice, specifically in a community that experienced some of the violence of gentrification. The violence of gentrification and that can be found in good-natured whiteness that creates disconnection, that creates separation from folks who are, queer, folks that are Black and brown and indigenous, folks that come from and whose peoples have historically been colonized and abused in our society, folks whose bodies and ways of presenting are seen as irregular or not normal, or just because of their size or their difference as unhealthy. These are all white supremacist, heteronormative ways of thinking. These are all violent ways of categorizing people and bodies. And so one of the things that I've been really struck by, wanted to hear Shri speak to and share with our community here is how she decided to take up space and lead from a place of the full embodiment of us. She made space for us in spaces like that. And I think that that's so critical and important. So Shri, I want to thank you so much for joining us on She Been Ready. We are in season 2. You're very much a part of this journey. You, as a friend, allow me to share my seedling ideas as they're coming into being, and as a co-conspirator, join me in being in this process and bringing just new and different and not so often articulated narratives of leadership and Black women's leadership. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So there is one question that we ask everybody as we start the podcast just to get ourselves going. And that is, you know, how did you know that you've been ready? How did you know? What were you doing? What was happening in your life? Was it connected to career? At what stage? If so, at what stage in your career where you realized I need to be in charge? I need to be at the helm? Was it in another space? For some of our uh, guests, they're like, I was born like this. There was no one time. Tell us your story. How did you know you've been ready to lead?
Well, I will start with how I was consciously brought to the yoga practice and just a leadership practice, because I do see leadership as a practice. I was around 27. I remember it was the summer of my 27th year, and I was working a lot at an ad agency. And I was, as they say, paying your dues. And so I was doing all the things, going above and beyond, as, I was conditioned to do as a child.
Okay.
And I started to just see that no matter how hard I worked, no matter what hoops I jumped through, it just still was never enough. So my paternal grandmother and I had always had a very close relationship, and she taught me things as a little girl that I saw come to fruition as an adult. And so when I started to see the pathways in my professional life not leading to what some would say the promised land, right, of success and happiness, I started to rely on some of those older practices and habits that I learned from my grandmother. And so I learned then that everything I need to know, I already have. And
What were some of those practices, if you don't mind sharing? I feel like our grandmothers, our mothers, our aunties have given us many things. Some of them may, we may have in common. Some of them may be different. If you feel comfortable sharing, I wonder about how our audience can connect to your story.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. First was just the prayer practice. My grandmother was raised a Baptist Christian.
Okay.
And there were definitely times while cleaning, while braiding hair, while cooking, there was always a story connected to the activity. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I was able to follow the breadcrumbs and the threads that led me through how to become well within my body.
Okay.
And those are things that I learned from her.
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just, when you said that, I got really curious. I'm like, well, what was that? I know that there are things that I learned from my mom, from my grandmother, from my auntie, that I am calling up as a middle-aged Black woman, and I'm claiming that middle age. I love it so much. There's something beautiful this side of 40 that you just can't even imagine.
There is.
You know what I mean? And so I'm realizing the wisdom, because I came through them and became conscious of them as women when they were in their middle age and older age, right? And so I'm noticing the things that they did to sustain themselves. And so as you're speaking, I'm thinking, I bet that Shri's grandma, that some of that you're sharing, I think that I might have some of that too. And, I can only imagine that folks listening would be like, yeah, my grandma told me some of that too, whatever that is.
Yeah, I mean, I would invite people to, remember back to those times if it's helpful. Like I'll just use one example of getting my hair pressed, right? And you might remember, or you might have lived an experience where that was pretty much a multi-layered process. The washing of the hair, the drying of the hair. This was before a lot of folks went to hair salons, right?
You're taking us there to the kitchen. We're going to the kitchen, and we're not talking about the back of the hair. We're talking about where it happens.
Absolutely.
In the kitchen. Yes.
And what I found, Wendi, is that was such a special, sacred time. I loved that time. One, because I'm the oldest of 8.
Okay.
2, because that was the time that I really felt my grandmother's hands connecting to me in a loving way. And there were just moments of just sharing and
Yes.
learning.
Yes.
And so as I got older
Mm-hmm.
and lost my grandmother and lost
Mm-hmm.
a lot of elders of that generation, my
Mm-hmm.
spirit really leaned deeply
Mm-hmm.
into
Mm-hmm.
those lessons
Mm.
because that is what carries me now.
I don't know about you, but my grandmother used to talk and she told all the business, especially to the girl children, because that she was doing our hair.
Yeah,
So we learned things about
yeah,
our grandfather that we probably shouldn't know, but I understand men very
yeah,
well. Like there's
right.
things that were going into that space. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it is such a sacred
Yes,
space. It
it
is.
is.
Okay.
My
So,
grandmother was the opposite.
oh,
She didn't
really?
say very much.
Oh,
So when
really?
she did,
Right. A pin
I
could
paid
drop.
attention.
Yeah. Yes, yes,
She was a woman of
yes.
few words.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Uh-huh. She had told you, she had raised you up and trained you up to have certain expectations for, what you might expect if you put in the hard work and paid your dues, and you saw that that wasn't really happening.
Yes. Well,
Mhm.
it was always a double-edged sword, right? And it
Okay.
was always the both sides of the coin. And that's one thing I really appreciated about the community in which I was raised,
Okay.
is because you had those grandmothers and aunties and big mamas, as we would call them,
Yeah.
give you one side of it. And then there was
Mhm.
always another auntie or someone, uncle maybe, who would give you the other. So I had a very healthy dose
Mhm.
of this is what you need to do to get ahead, but
Mhm.
watch for this, check this, make
Mhm.
sure you're aware of that. And so that hyper preparation, I call
Uh-huh.
it, is what helps me know
Mhm.
that I've been ready. I can't look to
Mhm.
someone else to give me my chance, right? I can't look to an organization
Mhm.
to construct a space that welcomes me. I
Mm.
have to do it
Mhm.
and, link up and connect with those that are also doing the work.
Mm. That's so powerful. I'm thinking of on social media, particularly Instagram. There's this affirmation put to music, like a percussion, and the man is saying everything that I want I already have, or basically I have everything that I need. And I'm hearing you say that, before you even left the house, before you left into
Mhm.
your adult world, your people poured into you to make sure that you had certain life lessons and informations and knowings and know-how, so that you weren't out here blindsided and brokenhearted by, let's call racism, sexism, all the things that can cause us to feel frustrated. And so you were able to persist because you were prepared for it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
almost akin to putting on the armor, right? In
Mm-hmm.
church sayings, it's putting on the armor of God.
Okay.
For my family, it was, we are going to prepare you here for
Mm-hmm.
what we know
Mm-hmm.
you will face out there,
Okay.
so that you don't get out there and get surprised, get taken advantage of,
Mm-hmm.
all of the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all the
Mm-hmm.
isms, they knew in
Mm-hmm.
their instinctive wisdom that I would somehow, some way come across these things.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate them showing me and
Mm-hmm.
growing me up in that
Mm-hmm.
way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the sadness, I think, in so many ways. I watch my own mother be very disappointed right now with the world as it is, because there are ways in which she feels like, did we already do this, y'all? And so the fact that, she's living in a post civil rights world that feels like Jim Crow black codes in some ways is, very disheartening. But they also knew that that would likely be what was awaiting us, because that is what their life story and their journey had entailed.
Yes.
So you were working and you were coming up against this sort of um, glass ceiling, cap at what success could look like, or, you can only go so much and go so far, or have only so many opportunities in a particular place. What was going on for you that where you decided, or how did you come into becoming a yoga teacher? That's what I really want to know. Like what you
Yeah.
mentioned
And I know
27 as a magic year.
yeah,
So what's going on there?
27 was a huge year for me.
Mm,
I get asked this question a lot. One, because I know that I may not embody what folks here in the West see as yoga teachers. I never set
mm-hmm,
out to be a yoga teacher.
mm-hmm,
At 27, I was brought to a yoga class to help address chronic insomnia. And at that point, working almost 70 hours a week on the average, I would go maybe 3 to 4 days with very little, if any, sleep.
ooh,
So someone brought me to a class and I was like, I'm not going to just sit on this pillow and hum, that this is not going to help me fall asleep.
wow.
But there was definitely something that touched in me in
Mm-hmm,
that practice. One, because I was able to get out of my head,
mm-hmm,
number one. Two, I was able to move my body in a space that was welcoming, and not just welcoming on the surface, right?
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
truly welcoming in all the ways I show up in the world.
mm-hmm,
And three, the last part of yoga is Shavasana, and
mm-hmm.
that is
Ooh,
for some, the hardest part.
be just, mm-hmm,
Yeah, just being still, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Shavasana is also called, corpse
Corpse
pose
pose.
or non-moving pose.
Mm-hmm,
Um, and it is the foundation of
mm,
what is to be led to meditation.
I see.
I fell asleep in Shavasana, and that was the
Yeah.
first time I had slept in 4 days. So
Whoa.
all of those things together
Mm,
really helped introduce me to a body movement or a body work practice that
mm-hmm,
felt very familiar to me. It felt like the getting the hair braided. It felt
mm-hmm,
like the
mm-hmm,
washing of the clothes together and the folding
mm-hmm,
of the sheets.
mm-hmm,
It
mm-hmm.
just felt like something in there that would help, and it did. So jump forward, right? I was still practicing off and on
Mm-hmm.
for like 10, 15 years. And my teacher at the time, who recently transitioned,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
I'm sorry. I saw that you
was,
talked about that online.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she said to me, and I never talked to her about my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
but she said something to me in a class once,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very uh, shocking
Okay.
because she just said, now you're ready. And that was something my grandmother would say
Oh.
before I left the house, right?
Mm.
She would do my hair, make sure my shoes were clean and everything. And then she would say, okay, now you're ready. You're ready to
Mm.
go out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
I don't think my teacher at the time meant it in that way, but I was frustrated by the yoga practice for a long time,
Why?
frustrated in not thinking that my body was doing it right. And
Oh,
I'm
I
like air
see.
quotes with my fingers, right?
Uh-huh.
And she, being of South Asian lineage,
Mm-hmm.
was watching me for months and months and months and didn't
Mm-hmm.
say anything to me.
Mm.
But she just said those were some of the first words she said to me. And she said, Shri, do less.
Mm.
So those two things sparked something in me that really encouraged me to seek more information.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And so that began, for lack of a better term, my apprenticeship with her.
Mm. Can we just dwell here a little longer and talk
Yes,
about that feeling of frustration?
yes,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of
yeah,
people are in yoga spaces, wellness spaces, mindfulness based spaces. The industry doesn't feel like it's for Black folks or Latinx folks. I mean, unless you have a teacher who's of that background, or
right,
we know that it's born out of Indian culture, but we also know that there's a
yes,
lot of whitewashing of that, and that the spirituality sometimes is disconnected from it. It becomes like exercise, like, you
right.
know, and so I guess I just wonder about, I guess I just wonder about your experience of feeling that discomfort. You know, what were those feelings? What helped you to persist even though you were not comfortable or that you were feeling frustrated? Um, what signals or signs were you getting in that space about your body in relation to other bodies?
Mm,
That you, yeah, I just wonder about
yeah,
that. And that made you feel like your body was not the right body in that space.
yeah. Well, that's an interesting question because I think myself as well as other folks, we've become, I'll just speak from myself,
Okay.
my perspective, I've become accustomed to
Mm-hmm.
being uncomfortable. I
Mm-hmm.
am used to going into spaces and not being welcomed, not belonging, feeling my body's in the way.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely ways in which we code switch, even
Mm-hmm.
in wellness practices,
Mm-hmm.
even in quote unquote community spaces. You
Mm-hmm.
know, for me, having a dance background,
Mm-hmm.
I immediately put on the mask of performance,
Okay.
right? That my body needed to do this a certain way so that it was right, it looked correct, no matter how it felt.
Mm-hmm.
So that conditioning kicked in. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until I got to a place where my body could no longer perform, even
Okay.
in yoga,
Mm-hmm.
that things within myself started becoming dismantled. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the performative um, habit, the people pleasing
Mm-hmm.
habit,
Mm-hmm.
the fetishized or having my body, always exoticized for the
Mm-hmm.
white lens,
Mm-hmm.
that was being dismantled. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, when I finally stepped into a space
Mm-hmm.
that was held by bodies that looked like mine,
Mm-hmm.
and also people, women
Mm-hmm.
that could hold all of me, not
Mm-hmm.
just physically, but everything that I come to the mat in and with.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I want to make sure that I communicate in this conversation is
Okay.
that our practices, as far as I should say, yoga in particular,
Mm-hmm.
is actually practiced by more people that don't look like the mainstream
Mm-hmm.
westernized yoga community.
Mm-hmm.
When I practiced in India, it was with other brown and round bodies, right? Old,
Mm-hmm.
young, short, tall, whatever your
Mm-hmm.
identifier could
Mm-hmm.
be,
Mm-hmm.
that's who was practicing. And it was not about the physical.
Mm.
I want to be sure that I highlight the fact that yoga is not just about asana or not just about the poses, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that is 95%, I would say, and that's just the arbitrary
Yeah.
percentage, but is primarily
Mm.
focused on here in the States. It's
Mm-hmm.
all about the
Mm-hmm.
pose
And the
and
performative piece, because when you said performative, I
and
thought,
the
and people
performance.
be out there performing, want to do headstands and
Yes,
all kinds of. I feel
I
like if you
mean,
don't stop, because I heard that
I
some
will
people get
tell,
some injuries from doing too much.
well, and that is, now that I'm on the other side and I'm in the seat of the teacher,
Mm-hmm.
I have seen some things.
Yeah.
I've been in classes with some
Mm-hmm.
very interesting, and I put interesting in air quotes,
Okay.
um,
Not interesting in a good way either.
practices,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I have to, be a part of changing the conversation around what yoga is,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, even the what we call the affinity based classes, things,
Mm-hmm.
classes that are inviting other types of bodies, other
Mm-hmm.
types of
Mm-hmm.
communities. There's a lot of angst I have with those because
Mm.
while I hold those as safe
Mm-hmm.
spaces or safer places to
Mm-hmm.
practice,
Mm-hmm.
they should not be the rule.
You're
Our
right.
bodies should be welcomed and present in every space that yoga is being offered.
I
And
know that that's true, but I have to tell you that even before I came to Third Root, like I hedged. So wasn't
oh,
sure,
yes,
you know, and I was like that
yes,
about any yoga space, or I definitely love and need the practice, but I'm
yes.
always wondering, is somebody going to come step on my mat and act like she don't know what
Well,
that's an act of aggression, or am I going to be made to feel uncomfortable, literally like everyone's talking to everybody else but no one's literally even acknowledged that I'm here. These types of
right.
things have happened. So yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, like we should all be able to go to any space. And at the same time, white supremacy doesn't work that way in those spaces. I mean, we literally feel like you're on the outside in a lot of them, which is one of the big